Hey YouTubers, my name is Andrea René and welcome to my channel, Andrea René Abroad, where I talk about Peace Corps, travel, and working abroad. I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer who served in Nicaragua from August of 2016 to April of 2018. And in today's video, I'm going to be discussing how much money you make during Peace Corps. In this video, I'm going to be covering everything from your living allowance to taxes, to your readjustment allowance, which you earn at the end of your service. So the first thing that I think it's important to wrap your head around is the idea that you are receiving a living allowance and not an income or a salary. I used to always tell my host family that we only get enough money to survive, and I think that's really important to think about. Now, I will say that different Peace Corps volunteers will approach their budget in very different ways. Some people choose to spend some of their own money, and other people choose to just live on the money that Peace Corps gives you during your service, called your living allowance. For my own personal experience, I felt that it was very important to understand what it was like to live as a Nicaraguan does. And so I decided that during my service, I would not spend any of my own personal money except for when I went on vacation to the United States. Depending on what country you're serving in, you will be making a different amount of living allowance. Because what Peace Corps does is they analyze what the living wage is in each of the Peace Corps countries, and then even break it down further to capital cities versus just smaller cities or communities, and how much money does the volunteer need to live at the same level as their community members, because integration is very important during Peace Corps. We're not trying to live all the snazzy high life or whatever, or the fachenta life, as they say in Nicaragua. So Peace Corps analyzes this and then comes up with an amount that generally will match your coworker's amount of income. So in Nicaragua, public high school teachers make roughly around $250 a month. So that is how much money I had to live on during my Peace Corps service. This varies from country to country, but for Peace Corps Nicaragua, we are paid within the local currency, which is called Cordobas. So in Cordobas, $250 was roughly $7,800. So that was our living allowance, and we got that once a month. So at least in Peace Corps Nicaragua, what they did is they set each of us up with a debit card account. We actually got paid the penultimate Wednesday of each month. But let's go ahead and break down the $250 a month that I was making as a Peace Corps volunteer. So during my Peace Corps service, I was placed in a department capital in the city of Esteli, which is the third largest city in Nicaragua. So I needed the full $250 in order to survive as a Peace Corps volunteer. In the city of Esteli, rent for a room is generally around $100 a month. So right off the bat, I would be down to $150 left per month to spend on other things. So I first paid my rent, which was $100, gave it to my host mom. After I paid my $100 rent, my next priority would be to pay for my gym membership. So again, I was living in the third largest city in Nicaragua, so I did have access to gyms in my site. I was able to find a gym membership for $20 a month. That is definitely on the high end of pay as far as Nicaragua goes, but that was just like a safe place for me where I could, not think about anything, just like put in my earbuds, listen to my podcast or whatever, and not feel like I was going to be harassed by anyone at my gym. That was like my next thing that I always paid for. So again, that was $20 a month, and that I did have to pay in USD. In the larger cities, I don't know how it is in other Peace Corps countries, but at least in Nicaragua, in the bigger cities, some things were expected to be paid in USD. Luckily, all ATMs in Nicaragua feed out USD and the local currency, Cordobas, so it wasn't a problem to pull out $20 bills. It was just kind of irritating because I was paid in Cordobas. But that was totally worth it, as I said, because it was for my own mental health and obviously physical fitness as well during Peace Corps. After I paid my $100 rent and my $20 gym membership, I would have the rest of my money left over to pay for the regular expenses that I had as a Peace Corps volunteer. So after doing all of the calculations, I realized that I had about enough money to budget myself to $25 a week, or 800 Cordobas a week for food, groceries, and transportation. And there would usually also be a little bit of money left over in there to get lunch or dinner with my sitemates at least once a week. So on Saturday evenings or on Sundays, I would head to the ATM and pull out my $25 in Cordobas, which is 800 Cordobas, and I would head to the grocery store to do all my shopping, and then to the mercado to get all of my fresh produce and basic grains, because it was just much better to buy those products at the open air market than it was to buy at the grocery store. That would pretty much be, about anywhere between 400 and 500 Cordobas right off the bat, paying for my groceries and whatnot. It is important to mention at this point that I was vegan during my service, and my rule was when I grocery shopped for myself in my house, I was 100% vegan. But if I was in a situation where I was at a birthday party or a baby shower or something like that, and I was offered food that was not vegan, I would eat it because I didn't want to offend anybody. Just being in another culture, you need to be cognizant of the fact that not all cultures have the privilege of choosing their diet. I wanted to be respectful of that. I didn't want to offend anybody, so that was basically my rule. But when I went grocery shopping, it was completely vegan. Now, had I wanted to purchase animal products such as eggs or meat, my grocery bill would have been probably a lot higher. Definitely being vegan did help me with my budget a lot. I don't know if I could have lived off of $825 a week if I was not vegan. So I will say that. Basically, that was enough money for me to get all my groceries. I didn't go hungry during Peace Corps. So at this point, I've talked about my rent, I've talked about my gym membership, and then also my grocery bill. And then what was left over from that, I would need to use for transportation. So luckily in the city of Esteli, they had a public urban bus system called the Urbano, and it was super cheap. So the exchange rate is 30 Cordobas to the dollar, and the Urbano only cost 4 Cordobas to ride. So that's super duper cheap. Like, there were taxis in the city of Esteli, but I really never used them because those cost about 75 cents to ride, which I know sounds cheap to all of you, but remember that I was only making $250 a month, so that was too expensive for my budget. Pretty much I only rode the Urbano or I walked. So after paying for all of my things, I did have a little bit of money to set aside in savings every month, and I just left it in my debit card account. I didn't pull that money out, that was left over. Now, in Peace Corps Nicaragua, they did give us an additional 1,000 Cordobas per month, and that was called our travel allowance. And about every 3 months, I did have enough money to take a little domestic trip to visit some of my friends or visit my host family from training. So that's just kind of the way that I budgeted my domestic travels. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of my video, I did not make enough money as a Peace Corps volunteer to pay tickets, airline tickets, to visit my family back in the United States. During Peace Corps, I came back to the United States twice, once to visit my grandma and then another time to just come home here for Christmas. Pretty much, I would recommend all of you to create a travel budget for yourself prior to Peace Corps. I don't think it's necessary to create like a supplementary budget for your day-to-day expenses in your host country, but if you would like to go home to the United States during service, definitely create a fund for yourself to be able to do that and to be able to support yourself while you're home in the United States. So you do have to pay taxes during Peace Corps. I know that sounds incredibly unfair. I mean, how can the US government be taxing someone who only makes $250 a month? But they do. So My recommendation to make this as easy for yourself as possible is to set up a TurboTax account before you leave for Peace Corps. So the way that TurboTax works is you do need to have a US phone number to set it up, and if you're like me, you will likely cancel or delete your US phone number before you leave for Peace Corps. Luckily, I had already been using TurboTax for a few years, so I was able to open up my account in Nicaragua and it didn't matter. But I did have some fellow Peace Corps volunteers who attempted to set a TurboTax account up in country and were unable to do so because they did not have a US phone number. So just do yourself a favor, set up a TurboTax account before you leave for Peace Corps, and don't worry, it will be the free version just because we don't make enough money. This video is not sponsored by TurboTax, but I just thought it was important to share with you all that tip. You do get what is called a readjustment allowance at the end of your service. And the way that this works, at least currently, at the time that I was a Peace Corps volunteer from 2016 to 2018, and at the time that I'm posting this video, each month that you are a Peace Corps volunteer, $350 will be put into an account for you in the United States. And at the end of your service, you will receive whatever amount of money was put into that account. So for example, even if you end up having to end your service early, and let's say you only have incurred $3,000, let's say, in that account, you will still receive that $3,000. But ideally, of course, you are able to do your entire service. They call it a readjustment allowance because they need to be able to support you in adjusting back to US life. So a lot of people use their readjustment allowance to, their first down payment on an apartment. Some people buy a car when they come back with that money. As I said before, it's $350 per month, and you get it at the end of your service at your COS, or if you are an ET, an early termination, you will also get it at the time of your ET, or your med sep if you're medically separated. That is when you will receive your readjustment allowance, and it just varies depending on when you come back to the United States. So that's the bulk of how much you make as a Peace Corps volunteer. I hope I answered all of your questions, but if you have any other questions for me, go ahead and comment below and I'll try to get back to you. If you haven't already subscribed to this channel, I would love for you to subscribe. It really helps support this channel, and I will see you next week. Bye.